We are the safeguard. This place, this Parliament, you and me, we are the people who protect the most vulnerable in society from harm, and yet we stand on the brink of abandoning that role. The Rubicon was a very small stream, Mr. Speaker, but on the other side lies a very different world, a worse world, with a very different idea of human value. The idea that our individual worth lies in our utility, valuable only for so long as we are useful, not a burden, not a cost, not making a mess. Let's not be the Parliament that authorises that idea. And I mentioned at the start the voices of those we cannot hear, frail and elderly and the disabled. And since we are surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses, let us do better than this bill. Let today not be a vote for despair, but the start of a proper debate about dying well, in which we have a better idea than a state suicide service, in which we remember that we have intrinsic value, that real choice and autonomy means having access to the best care possible and the fullest control over what happens to you while you live, that true dignity consists in being cared for to the end. Thank you.
Robust safeguards for the sick and dying are absolutely vital to protect them from predatory relatives, to protect them from the state, but above all, to protect them from themselves. There will be those who say to themselves they don't want to be a burden. And I can imagine myself saying that in particular circumstances. Others will worry that assets they had hoped to leave for their grandchildren are being eroded by the cost of care. And there will even be a handful who will think they should not be taking up a hospital bed.
My daughter Maria lived her life with severe disabilities and health conditions, and since her birth we were told many times that she might have only 6 months to live. She lived for 27 years. Crucially, Maria was non-verbal, and I am filled with dread and fear for those other people like Maria who are non-verbal and don't have that capacity, and what might happen to others like Maria if they aren't loved and cared for and have somebody speaking out for them.
I started the debate where she is just now, and she mentioned stories. The things that have moved me in this debate to opposing this bill today is that I've also heard stories of disabled people who have had Do Not Resuscitate put onto their medical records without their permission, of them being stopped by strangers in the street and being told you would be better off dead. And I know she will say that we are dealing and voting today on the specifics of her bill, but we're also voting on a principle.
Everyone across the House, I have listened carefully to the evidence in coming to my conclusion on the danger this bill represents. Each individual person is of extraordinary value, not because of their capacity, their intelligence, their appearance, or for any other reason than they are human.
Fight in this House to take stigma, give dignity, equality and worth. It is why disabled people fear this bill. It devalues them in a society where they fight to live. Understand why Disability Rights UK opposes, why Liberty opposes. To push back against this bill is the cause of the progressive, the libertarian, not just the domain of the conservative.
Here we are, on the precipice of agreeing to sanction and support the deaths of people in despair. A society has chosen a dystopian and contagious path if it chooses to facilitate the death of those who have a terminal illness rather than standing with them, weeping with them, valuing them and loving them against the desolation that any of us would feel if we were given a diagnosis of that sort. No wonder that the government's own suicide prevention advisor is strongly opposed to this bill. So I urge all of us to stand in defence of those most vulnerable people, to defiantly defend their liberty, to make a renewed commitment to world-class palliative care and to human dignity, and to reject this bill.
Put simply, Madam Deputy Speaker, we should be helping people to live comfortable, pain-free lives on their own terms before we think about making it easier for them to die.
As a former mental health doctor, I'm most proud that I was there for the most vulnerable. And today I think about those without a voice in this debate or in the TV studios. I think about the elderly woman in the care home, with mild cognitive impairment, retained capacity, but nevertheless vulnerable to coercion and undue influence. Or the sick mother whose child may lose their job or relationship due to the burden of caring responsibilities. This bill doesn't protect them. It risks placing implicit pressure on people already vulnerable at a time of life they should be receiving our unwavering care and support. We should and must vote it down.
We have to be very clear today that we are not just having a debate on the principle, but on this bill. But the principle at stake is that we do cross a Rubicon, whereby somebody who is ill, who is terminally ill by the definition of this bill, is assisted by the state to die. This is a fundamental change in the relationship between the state and the citizen, and the patient and their doctor. If we have a scintilla of doubt about allowing the state that power, we should vote against this today.
Consider this just in terms of individual hard cases, but in terms of society as a whole. What sort of society are we? Are we a society that loves our NHS, that loves life, that loves caring, that loves the hospice movement? Or are we a society which believes that there is despair? So I will be voting for hope at 2:30, and I will be voting against this bill.
The bill allows doctors to propose assisted dying to patients. Some of the worst Canadian abuses have originated this way. For example, a 51-year-old Canadian cancer patient was notoriously offered death instead of surgery. Even though our proposed system has its differences, this is still a risk I am not willing to take. The current law presents us with a clear boundary that can never be crossed. It avoids all slippery slopes with no room for error. Legislation of assisted suicide would replace this with an arbitrary boundary that is rife for misunderstanding, error, and at worst, abuse.
This is a matter of the taking of human life. The taking of human life sanctioned by the state. Our nation, through many wonderful charities, through government itself, reaches out compassionately to those who are threatening suicide. They are urged to use the services of the Samaritans and to get all the help they can. Mr. Speaker, I cannot square the circle where the state would then move to itself sanction suicide, indeed to facilitate suicide, in fact to promote suicide, and to do it in respect of those who are intrinsically the most vulnerable in our society.
After spending almost a decade working to protect women and children from harm, my focus with any piece of legislation is the potential it creates for abuse and coercion. And whilst I would have once been supportive of the principle of assisted dying and might wish this option for myself, I have increasingly found myself unable to reconcile my desire to safeguard the most vulnerable with putting that principle into practice. I am concerned that if this bill passes, we will see people coerced, either by an abuser or by societal expectations, into ending their own lives.